the huge facets of this idea of healing from PTSD or healing from trauma of any sort is people, places, and things, right? And our people end up being very sticky in those situations because often our trauma comes from people we know, people, quote, that we love, right? And I know with myself and with so many of my clients, the idea of forgiveness in the way we have been given it is really difficult. Mm-hmm. It's really difficult to say, turn the other cheek, right? And that's kind of been our idea of what forgiveness should look like. And, you know, when you've been turning the other cheek since you were 3, when does it come a point that you choose to not run into the door again, right? And I think that what I've learned through this is that, you know, forgiveness is not about what they're doing or what they did. It's about what they're going to do next. What is that person that you're bumping up against? What is going to be their next right choice, right? Versus blame over what was. If we can move our thoughts into like, what is that next right choice, right? And is that acceptable to me, their next move, right? When Junebug came out, right? Well, let's back up even further. Like, you know, I remember being at a funeral where my favorite uncle had died. The glue of our family had passed away, and then it was like the matriarch. And I walk into this room, and all 3 of my sexual abusers were in one space. And it was almost like that blip that I needed to see reality clearly finally, right? And I just remember standing there laughing. And I was like, how absurd is this moment right now? Right? I was healthy enough to see that. And I looked at my brother and said, I won't ever be back here again. Like, I will not be back here again. This is ridiculous. That in some reality, this is okay. That I should be in that position. And that everyone was okay with that, right? I call it the watchers. Why would you allow pedophiles even in the room? Why would you choose that? You know, that's a space that I've never been able to understand. But it is what happens in family, right? And that is what happens in trauma.
And people act like it's normal.
Yeah, well, they just like want to say, oh, get over it. Well, you don't get over it because of PTSD. You're constantly being catapulted back, and they're just wanting you to walk forward, right? So anyway, as the universe plays with our game, right, I must be ready to touch on this place of forgiveness with one of my people. So my daughter's flying in from California, and I get a text from my brother saying, is Danielle on this plane? I haven't spoken to him since Junebug came out 5 years ago, which was an explosion. And you know, he made the action to go back, and as destiny would have it, there was also an empty seat next to her. And she didn't see him, so he could have gone on, right? He could have just walked on and pretended like it wasn't a part of his reality. But instead, he texted me, which I hadn't spoken to him forever, and is Danielle on this plane? And I was like, yeah. You know, and they sat and spoke for 2 hours. He ended up moving back there, and then he waited for her luggage and came out to actually see me. So as I pull up, there she is standing with him, right? But what was beautiful about the moment is like they're really, you know, I think they both left saying, you know, I really hope that we can sit down and talk this out. And I guess, to me, at this point, that words are very cheap. And just words are very cheap. And it was interesting that, on the way home, I was like, well, it's not about us having a conversation. Like, I don't really need it because he feels so different.
Mm-hmm.
Right? He felt so different. Like, when I hugged him, to all their benefit, the ones that were not my abusers, like, again, that place of narcissism around victimhood.
Mm.
Right? I caused them a lot of pain because he doesn't have PTSD. So there was no him getting on with his life either, because I was so stuck, needing validation. I just needed validation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's mostly what we need, is somebody to say, yeah, that freaking happened to you. And that was wrong. So my next right choice, right? And that's been the place. It's like, how do we move forward in this idea of forgiveness when the choices are the same as they were in the original scenario? And the energy, right, is still in that place of discredit. And I guess since Junebug came out and I've really been speaking out, that's what I have felt like that more energy has been put into discrediting me than supporting me, right? And no, not with him. Like, I truly have not spoken to him since Junebug came out.
But how do you forgive in your heart, whether or not there's ownership on their part, and especially when they're discrediting it?
Yeah, I think it's a completely different idea of what forgiveness is. It's about, letting go of the suffering around it, right? Letting go of the need to be validated by a person with their head in a hole.
Letting go of giving it energy.
Right?
But then where do you put that energy?
Well, I think then the energy can go into life, right? And I feel like, I guess here's where I came to with my people as a truce. Almost a truce. Like, all right, if we're playing a game of chess, I'm not angry or pointing blame, but I am not going to accept or receive less than respect. And don't tell me what happened to me. That's a piece that, when we're living in this little Truman Show of ours, that we feel we have the right to declare truth over someone's experience. And that was the last big explosion. I was like, were you in that bedroom with me? Were you standing there? If not, you have no business telling me what happened to me. You can tell me what you think. If they were standing there and they said, no, that is not what happened, then we'd have something to talk about. But you're not even in the space. You're upstairs or someplace else, and you're going to come to me and tell me that didn't happen. And that's a place that moms tend to fall into. Tend to fall into that. No, that didn't happen. Because we either don't want to believe it, it makes us feel inferior as mothers. I think that as I backed out, as with we all are, it takes a lot to look in the mirror and say, I didn't show up. That happened because I didn't show up. Right? And I think we all have scenarios around that. Right? So it's either we either stay in the illusion and never show up, or we step forward and say, okay, how can I show up today? Right? And that's forgiveness.